Welcome to Hidden Front History. This is the deep dive where we take your sources, personal accounts, forgotten records, articles, and we really uncover those nuggets of knowledge that are so often hidden just beneath the surface of the official story.
And today, we are stepping very far away from the front lines. I mean, we're not talking about tank battles or strategic bombings.
No, not at all. Our focus today is on this incredibly profound, intimate moment of raw human emotion, and it's set 6 months after Germany's surrender.
In a place most people would never associate with World War II.
The Deep South, Louisiana.
Exactly. It's a story that just defies all expectations, and it really forces you to look at the psychological aftermath of war and propaganda.
So our sources, they drop us right into the climax of this story. It's October 1945 at a prisoner of war camp, Camp Ruston.
And we meet a 23-year-old German POW named Margaret. She's clutching her son, Klaus, who is just 3 days old.
Just imagine that for a second. The sheer vulnerability. She's weakened from childbirth. She has this tiny new baby against her chest, and then she sees them.
American guards approaching her.
And they're speaking English, which is just noise to her. She can't translate it, can't understand their intent. And then they reach for the baby.
And in that one instant, years of state-mandated fear,
Yeah.
all the propaganda about the barbaric, cruel Americans, it just floods back.
The source material is so vivid here. It describes her reaction as just collapsing, screaming.
It wasn't even a human sound, really. The source calls it a raw animal sound, a primal noise. She is absolutely 100% certain they are taking her child to harm him, to experiment on him, to kill him.
That scream, that one desperate sound echoing through those wooden barracks, that's really the pivot point for this entire deep dive.
It is.
Our mission here is to use Margaret's journey, from her terrified arrival at this camp to that final moment of panic, to really understand two things.
Okay.
First, what was really going on? Where were the Americans actually taking that baby?
And second, I think, is the bigger question. How does a consistent, almost quiet, bureaucratic decency, how does that just completely dismantle the most entrenched wartime hatred you can imagine?
Yes. This is a story about the psychology of defeat, where the enemy's kindness, in a way, becomes the ultimate weapon.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to go back. We need to start with her arrival in the spring of 1945, because her transformation took months, and you really have to understand the initial conditions to get it.
Right, context is everything. So, Margaret, she wasn't a combat soldier, not in the way we usually think of it.
No, she was a former Wehrmacht auxiliary, a communications officer, one of the many, many women the German military machine pulled into service.
And she's only 23, but when she's captured, she's already 4 months pregnant.
And the father of her child, a Luftwaffe pilot, had been killed just weeks before in the final chaos of the war.
So she arrives carrying this. It's like a triple burden.
It is. First, you have the grief. The father of her child is dead. Second, you have this immense social shame. An unmarried mother in a very conservative time.
And then, on top of all that, there's just the sheer debilitating terror of being captured by an enemy she's been taught is subhumanly cruel.
She expected nothing less than brutal retribution.
The journey itself must have been just completely disorienting. I mean, transported across an entire country by train, ending up in Louisiana.
The sources really emphasize this sensory shock. Imagine going from the cold, damp, starving German spring
to the thick, wet, smothering heat of the American South. The source says the humidity hit her like a wall, damp and hot, stealing the breath from her lungs.
And it wasn't just the heat. It's the total foreignness of the world around her. The smells. She was used to the smell of, burning rubble, damp wool uniforms, the general odor of wartime austerity.
And here she's hit with the scent of pine trees and something intensely sweet and floral.
Right. We know now it was magnolia blossoms, but to her it was just this alien, overwhelming perfume. It just amplified her vulnerability. It set the stage for everything.
That contrast expectation versus reality, that's where our deep dive really begins. Because this is where the policy of the United States Army became, maybe inadvertently, revolutionary.
Her Wehrmacht briefings, the training she had prepared her for one thing.
Brutality.
Exactly. The camps were supposed to be violent places, designed for suffering, for extracting information.
But what she saw at Camp Ruston, it was a visual contradiction.
Yes, of course, you had the elements of a prison, the rows of unpainted wooden barracks, the barbed wire fences, guard towers. The structure was confinement.
But the atmosphere, the whole atmosphere was just wrong.
The paths were swept clean. There were even, small vegetable gardens next to some of the barracks, little domestic touches.
And the guards, that detail is so jarring to her.
It really is. They weren't marching around, rifles aimed at prisoners' heads. They were just walking, casually, sometimes chatting with each other.
With their rifles, the source says, slung casually over their shoulders, almost like an afterthought.
And this lack of open hostility, this strange normalcy, was the first real shock. She thought it looked, despite the wire, almost peaceful.
Which has to create this instant, just debilitating cognitive dissonance.
Completely. She's internalized this belief that the enemy is a monster dedicated to revenge. But the environment, the demeanor of the guards, it all suggests something. Well, something far less satisfyingly evil.
It's just a massive, efficient bureaucracy.
Yes, simply managing a logistical problem, a defeated workforce. You can imagine her just constantly scanning the horizon, thinking, where is the cruelty? Where's the violence they promised us? When does the real suffering begin?
And nothing challenges propaganda or a prisoner's ability to maintain hatred quite like food.
Oh, the food. We cannot overstate the psychological impact of the mess hall.
This is where the American system, maybe without even meaning to, delivered this just devastating psychological blow.
The smell alone must have felt like a kind of mockery. She's hit with this overwhelming scent of cooking meat, fried chicken, biscuits baking, real coffee brewing.
And you have to remember her reality back in Germany just before this. Months of scarcity, living on turnips, watery soup, bread bulked out with sawdust.
If she was lucky, a few boiled potato peels.
And the sources say she held more actual, high-quality food on a single tray in that mess hall than she had seen in her entire life for months.
And this food paradox, it immediately sparks suspicion among the other women.
Right, because they've all had the same indoctrination.
Their reaction is pure fear. They whisper to each other, they're trying to trick us. Food that good cannot be real. They're fattening us up.
The fear isn't that the food is poison.
No, the fear is that the kindness is the poison. That it's too generous, too rich, it's too contradictory to the narrative they need to believe in to maintain your own sense of moral superiority.
Because if the enemy is this well-fed and willing to share, what does that say about your own failed system?
Exactly. And the sensory experience went beyond just sight and smell. It was the soundscape, too.
The absence of what she expected.
The total absence of harsh military discipline. No shouted commands, no boots stomping in formation, no sounds of violence.
Instead, she hears casual English voices, sometimes with that slow Southern drawl and American jazz music.
Brassy and foreign, as she described it, playing somewhere in the camp.
And this quiet routine, these normal sounds, the normalcy of it all was paradoxically terrifying.
She braced herself for suffering, for clear-cut hostility. That's something you can fight internally. But simple, unearned decency, that's much, much harder to process.
It forces you to confront the dangerous possibility that everything you've been taught about the enemy is a lie.
And for a prisoner whose entire identity is tied to that hatred, that realization is deeply destabilizing.
So what does she do? She falls back on the most fundamental act of self-protection she has left.
Hiding the pregnancy.
She knows that's a vulnerability that could be exploited.
And it wasn't just a physical vulnerability, it was deeply moral, social. She's carrying the shame of being an unmarried woman, pregnant by a dead man. She's convinced the Americans, who she thinks are capable of anything, will use it to punish her or take her child.
She sees her reflection in a window, and the source says she looks older than 23, with eyes like a frightened animal.
And she makes this silent vow to protect the baby no matter what.
But she knows it's a futile promise. She has no power. She's a defeated enemy. The pretense has to end when they go through medical processing.
And even that environment is another layer of contrast. White walls, bright, buzzing electric lights, clinically clean. It screams of order and efficiency, not brutality.
And this is where she meets Nurse Dorothy.
The American nurse. Crisp white uniform, perfectly starched, maybe even wearing red lipstick. She's a vision of healthy, well-nourished American womanhood.
But the most shocking detail, again, is the smile. Dorothy offers a small professional smile, an act of simple human recognition. And to Margaret, who's expecting a monster, it's almost paralyzing.
The physical exam is that unavoidable moment of truth. Dorothy is methodical, efficient, gentle.
And then comes that moment. Dorothy presses her hand against Margaret's swollen abdomen, pauses, and looks right into her eyes.
This is it. This is the moment Margaret expects the verdict of the war to finally be delivered upon her. The judgment, the cruelty, the separation.
And what happens instead is so critical to understanding the entire American POW system.
Instead of judgment, instead of punishment, what she got was operational indifference to ideology.
Dorothy just writes something on a clipboard, speaks to a translator.
And the translator delivers this totally practical, almost bland bureaucratic order.
What was the order?
You will be placed in quarters with extra rations. The doctor will see you weekly.
That's it.
That's it. No moralizing, no questions about the father, no political commentary, just a strictly pragmatic, medically mandated response.
The significance of that is immense.
It is. The United States Army was bound by the Geneva Convention. That convention stipulated that POWs must receive adequate medical care and sustenance.
So her pregnancy wasn't seen as a moral failing or a national weakness to exploit.
It was a medical condition to be managed. It required extra provisions and regular professional oversight. The system itself was designed to be objective.
It's the ultimate example of protocol overruling personal vengeance. I mean, the American guards might have hated the Nazis, but the U.S. military machine was bound by a rule book.
And that rule book treated her condition as a purely logistical and medical issue. The protocol saved her. And that non-judgmental response was far more psychologically challenging than open hostility would have been.
How so?
Because it didn't give her a target for her hatred. She was prepared to hate a monster. She wasn't prepared to be processed by a system.
So now, with the safety of her child seemingly confirmed, that food paradox from earlier hits differently.
Completely. That first meal, knowing she's eating for two, the sub-details are incredible. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, bread with real butter, cold milk.
It's the sensory explosion. Crispy, tender, juicy, salt and spices on her tongue, food tasting real again.
For Margaret, it was a physical affirmation of survival. But for some of the other women, the richness was actually too much. Their bodies had been ravaged by starvation for so long.
This source mentions one woman eating so fast she became violently sick. Her body just couldn't process it.
And this is where that internal conflict among the prisoners just got deeper. This ideological resistance to the kindness. The food created a profound divide.
It really did. Because the older women, the ones whose loyalties were most deeply entrenched, they needed the enemy to be evil.
It was the only way to justify their own loyalty, their nation's suffering. The kindness had to be a trick.
We have that quote from the older woman sitting across from Margaret.
This is how they will kill us. With kindness, we will become soft, forget who we are, and then they will destroy us.
That is the psychology of a radicalized ideology in a nutshell.
Absolutely. Because if the enemy is kind, then your suffering and the suffering of the whole German nation, it loses its meaning, becomes pointless. Or worse, it becomes proof that the hatred you cultivated was actually self-inflicted.
And that hatred provides a strange kind of identity and comfort.
But Margaret didn't have the luxury of holding on to that comforting hatred. Her survival, and more importantly, her child's survival, was a biological imperative that just superseded all of that.
She's just focused on the fact that her baby is finally getting real nutrition.
She and the child are safe. They're in a clean barracks with running water. These are amenities that most civilians in Germany hadn't seen in years.
So as the weeks turn into months, she's locked in this, what the source calls a dream-like ordinariness, just waiting, watching, and slowly, very reluctantly, accepting the safety that's being provided by the very people she was taught to despise.
So let's delve into those middle months. The routine becomes almost boring.
Which in itself is a kind of mercy, right?
An incredible mercy. Up at 6 a.m., breakfast, always hot, always enough. Then light duties. Because she was so far along in her pregnancy, Margaret worked in the camp laundry.
And just think about the symbolism there. She's washing the uniforms of the men who defeated her country, the enemy.
And yet, she was being paid for it in camp scripts, which she could then use at the canteen.
For things that were just unimaginable luxuries back home. Chocolate, soap, cigarettes.
She was experiencing an economic stability and a material abundance inside a prison camp that far, far exceeded the life she would have been living as a civilian in Germany at that exact moment.
The sources call it a period of dreamlike ordinariness. And Nurse Dorothy just continues her professional, kind, but distant care.
Weekly checks, monitoring the baby's growth, making sure her diet was right. Dorothy was just managing another enemy woman according to regulations. It was clinical, effective.
And crucially, non-personal.
That impersonal efficiency made it easier for Margaret to accept, but it also kept her from developing any real trust. That only started to break through when the grim reality of the outside world finally pierced the bubble of Camp Ruston.
That happened in July, right?
Yes. The source material says she received her first letter from Germany. It took 3 months to get to her. It was from a cousin in Hamburg.
written on thin, ration paper and heavily censored.
And this letter is just a brutal confrontation with the reality Margaret had escaped. The cousin describes the destruction. Hamburg is rubble. Their street is gone.
And their Aunt Greta had died back in February.
From starvation. Specifically from starvation. The letter is just a catalog of misery. There are no doctors. The children beg in the streets. We are starving.
And this is the moment the moral conflict becomes acute for her.
How could it not? She's reading this, sitting in the Louisiana heat, having just eaten a meal of pork chops, mashed potatoes, and apple pie.
The source says she felt sick with guilt. Her country is starving, her family is dying, and she is growing fat and healthy, her baby thriving, all thanks to the enemy.
It forces her into this unbearable position of internal betrayal. She tries to help. She buys crackers, chocolate, condensed milk from the canteen to send home.
But all packages were blocked for security reasons.
The only thing she could send back was a letter. And she was forced to write it, as the source says, full of lies about being treated well. She couldn't tell the truth.
Why not?
She was terrified. Terrified that the reality of her comfort would either make her family hate her for abandoning their shared suffering, or it would just completely shatter their ability to hold on to their own identity.
The emotional weight of that forced deception is just immense. She's actively denying her own survival to protect the political framework of the people she loves.
And in denying her comfort, she's forced to acknowledge that her enemy is providing a demonstrably better quality of life than her own system ever could.
That's the deep political insight right there.
It is. The Reich promised 1,000 years of glory, of strength through sacrifice. And what it delivered was ashes and starvation.
The supposed enemy, meanwhile, delivered daily sustenance, medical care, and physical safety.
Her loyalty was being tested not by torture, but by pork chops.
And the defenses she'd built up, they really started to crack, not because of the institutional care, but because of a small, private, unsolicited act of humanity.
This is where we meet Jimmy.
A young American guard. A farm boy from Iowa, the source says. And he's just fascinated by her obvious pregnancy.
Jimmy and the rattle. It's such a profound moment of connection across enemy lines.
How does it happen?
Margaret is walking back from the laundry one afternoon, and Jimmy stops her. He gets the barracks translator to help. He says his sister just had a baby, and he wanted to know if Margaret needed anything.
Her initial reaction has to be suspicion.
Automatic. What does he want? Why is this enemy soldier being kind?
But he just pulls something from his pocket.
A small, smooth wooden rattle, crudely carved, clearly handmade with a pocket knife during a slow shift. And the translator says, "He made it for your baby."
Yeah.
This is the moment the bureaucratic wall just collapses. A simple, unrequired gift made by the hands of a formal enemy soldier for the child of a woman he was just assigned to guard.
The shock isn't just the gift, it's the sheer personalized effort behind it. No one else had given her anything so hopeful, so personal for the baby.
She takes it slowly, her hands shaking. And that object, born of just simple rural American decency, it broke something inside her. It shattered the rigid ideological lines she'd been clinging to.
The source says she held that rattle that night and just cried silently.
The core confusion was paralyzing. The enemy was not cruel. The enemy was caring for her, feeding her, and now making handmade gifts for her unborn child.
That reality just did not compute with her training.
That small, smooth piece of wood was far more effective at destroying her will to hate than any interrogation ever could have been. It forced her to grapple with a truth she desperately wanted to reject.
That maybe the enemy wasn't the monster after all.
By the time September arrived, Margaret was huge, weak, and exhausted. The physical burden was matched only by the psychological one.
Because the whispers from the other women persisted, feeding her deepest anxieties about what the Americans would really do once the child was born.
These weren't just idle fears. They were persistent, collective doubts about American intentions toward German children.
And this long, anxious wait, it led her to a really profound philosophical turning point one night.
She was outside the barracks, which was against the rules, and she was watching the American soldiers in the distance. They were playing baseball under the camp lights.
Young, laughing, seemingly untouched by the war they had just won. The source says they looked unbroken.
And the revelation she had is just astonishing in its simplicity. She'd always believed the Führer's promise of glory and the narrative of the enemy as a monster.
But now, watching that baseball game, she connected the dots between that field and the bombed-out ruins of Hamburg.
America was strong, not because it was cruel, as she had been taught. It was strong because it was able to protect its own people. Its cities were intact, its children were safe, its young men could still play games, fully nourished.
Germany had promised glory through sacrifice and delivered only death. America, the supposed monster, had delivered safety, health, and a real chance of survival for her and her unborn child.
And that distinction, survival through safety versus glory through suffering, it felt like a greater power than anything the Reich had ever promised her.
She realized the enemy was winning not just with bombs, but with the quiet dignity of a functioning, healthy, protected society.
And this growing realization of American humanity was solidified just days before the birth by another act of pure grace.
Margaret experiences false labor.
Yes, in early October. Dorothy, the nurse, rushes in. She's still in her nightgown. She confirms it's not time yet, but then she does something extraordinary. She doesn't just leave.
She sits with Margaret. For an entire hour, Dorsey holds Margaret's hand, talking quietly until the false contractions fade.
And Margaret knew, she absolutely knew, Dorothy did not have to do that. It wasn't a medical duty. It wasn't in the Geneva Convention. It was a pure, unrequired act of human comfort.
And this collection of small kindnesses was finally completely eroding her ideological defenses.
So the real labor began on October 12th. It was a professional operation from the start.
She was carried on a stretcher under the Louisiana stars, the irony, she noted, of giving birth under foreign stars in enemy hands.
But she was being cared for. The delivery room was clean, bright, and medically equipped. Far better than anything she could have accessed back in Germany.
7 hours of labor, with Dorothy coaching her, wiping her forehead, treating her like a patient, not a prisoner.
And then, as the sun rose over Camp Ruston, there was the cry, Klaus Wolfgang, a perfect, healthy, 8-pound boy.
She holds him and feels this pure, uncomplicated, unconditional love, the first clear emotion she'd felt in years that wasn't tinged with fear or guilt.
He was hers. He was real. A miracle born in the safest place on earth for her at that moment.
They let her stay in the recovery room for 3 days. It felt like a real hospital. But then, on that third day,
The propaganda came roaring back for one final devastating assault.
Dorothy and 2 guards return, with the translator.
And the request they made was medically sound, standard procedure. They needed to take the baby to the nursery for the night so Margaret, who was exhausted from labor, could rest and recover properly.
But Margaret did not hear rest and recover.
No. In that instant, all the years of propaganda, all the whispered horror stories, it all just flooded her consciousness.
The simple medical request was instantly translated by her brain into the ultimate confirmation of their cruelty.
She pulled Klaus tighter and let out that raw animal sound of pure terror. She fought them. Weak from childbirth, fighting trained soldiers, absolutely convinced they were taking him to be killed.
Her screams echoed through the barracks. The other women watched in horror, believing their deepest fears were finally being realized.
It was the ultimate collision of belief and reality. All the kindness, the food, the rattle, Dorothy holding her hand, it all just dissolved under the primal force of parental panic.
Klaus was gently but firmly pried from her arms. The door closed. She collapsed, certain she had failed and that she would never see her son again.
It was the longest and the hollowest night of her life. She lay there just broken. The war had taught her that hope was dangerous and usually fatal.
She was convinced she was right, that after all the false kindness, the enemy was now taking their ultimate revenge by taking her child.
The loneliness, the aching emptiness of her arms, it was proof to her that the cruel monster she had been promised was finally here.
And then dawn. The long, terrifying night finally ended. She hears footsteps. The door opens.
And it's Dorothy, the crisp, white uniformed nurse, and she's carrying a bundled baby.
Klaus.
He's alive, he's clean, he smells of soap, he's in a fresh diaper, and he immediately stops crying the moment he's placed back on her chest. The relief, the sources say, was so profound it was physically painful.
This is the moment of hard-won resolution.
It is. Dorothy explains, through the translator, the simple, mundane reality. They took him to the nursery. It was standard medical procedure mandated for the health of both mother and child.
To ensure the baby had proper heat and observation, and to allow Margaret the rest she desperately needed.
It wasn't cruelty. It was care. It was mercy, hidden behind clinical procedure. The source uses that perfect phrase, kindness disguised as rules.
They were just following a strict, objective protocol designed for vulnerable patients, regardless of their nationality.
And to really solidify this truth, Dorothy took Margaret to see the nursery.
It was a small, white room with cheerful yellow curtains, a far cry from a military lab.
Clean cribs, ample supplies, a schedule for feedings and checkups, all organized, bright, and safe.
And this is where she has that final, heartbreaking, unavoidable realization.
That American POWs, even enemy babies, received better medical care than German civilians at home.
That observation is the ultimate, non-negotiable defeat of ideology.
It's not about the Americans being better people. It's about their system being functional, well-supplied, and committed to a baseline of human dignity, even for the enemy.
Her own country had promised strength through sacrifice and delivered only death and medical ruin.
The ability to care for the innocent and the vulnerable was what her nation had truly lost. And her son, Klaus, was living proof of the enemy's superior functionality.
That's a devastating truth to have to accept, that the society you were taught to hate was the one that provided the sanctuary your own society could not.
Almost unbearable to digest, yet undeniable. After a week of night visits to the nursery, she was allowed to keep Klaus full-time in the barracks.
And he became the barracks baby.
A symbol of fragile new life amidst all that defeat. The other women, many of whom had watched her screaming fit, now rallied around him. They sang German lullabies. They helped Margaret when she was exhausted.
And the small acts of kindness continued. Jimmy the guard reappeared.
And proudly brought Klaus a worn, old, stuffed bear that had belonged to his nephew. Just another small, ordinary human moment.
The women helping, the enemy guard offering a worn toy. These small gestures continued to break down the final walls of her hatred.
The enemy was feeding her child, giving him toys, treating him like he mattered, not just as the son of a defeated nation.
Her final acceptance of the truth came late one night while she was nursing Klaus. She looked at his healthy, full face.
And realized she could not lie to him, ever, about his origins.
She finally accepted the painful, complicated, necessary truth. The enemy had been kinder to her child, more merciful to her, than her own country could have been in its final days.
The conclusion she reached was just so powerful. The Americans had shown more mercy than the Reich had ever shown to anyone.
And that psychological reversal is everything. That initial moment of terror, the scream, that was the necessary final expression of the lie she had lived under.
Everything that followed, based on medical protocol and simple decency, that was the reality. They took the baby not to destroy, but to ensure his survival.
So what does this extraordinary, intimate deep dive into Camp Ruston truly reveal? We've traced her journey from this propaganda-fueled terror to the quiet, painful acceptance of reality.
And that central aha moment, as you said, is that the terrifying climax, the sound of her scream, was actually the prelude to the greatest act of humanity she had experienced in years.
They took the baby not to inflict harm, but to ensure his survival.
And this story is so crucial because it illustrates how complex the defeat of a hateful ideology can be. It often happens not in grand historical pronouncements,
but in quiet, almost mundane moments. The smell of fried chicken, the efficiency of a nurse, the gift of a crudely carved rattle.
The source material suggests that while the Allies won the war with tanks and aircraft, they truly won the peace by treating prisoners like human beings.
They won the psychological war by choosing dignity over revenge, protocol over passion.
And Margaret eventually told Klaus this story later in life. She taught him a powerful lesson, that propaganda lies, that enemies can be merciful, and that dignity, applied consistently, is the most powerful weapon against hatred.
A truth that many in his generation, born into the ruins of defeat, would struggle profoundly to accept. It's a truly profound thought to leave you with.
So consider this. What does it fundamentally mean when your own commitment to survival forces you to accept kindness from the very people your society trained you to hate? How does a painful and necessary truth like that redefine your understanding of loyalty, of patriotism, of humanity itself? When you're forced to acknowledge that the enemy was, in fact, the most human choice available to you. Just think about the enormous personal strength it took for Margaret to acknowledge that reality. We'll see you next time on Hidden Front History.